To celebrate a year of TellyCast, we've teamed up with Workshare Consulting to launch the TellyCast Workshare Content Industry Monitor. Taking the pulse of the global business of TV, this exclusive regular survey will analyse your views to find out how the TV business feels about the key issues it faces today. So, we're asking all of our listeners, from producers to financiers, from distributors to networks, and everyone in between, to please take a few minutes to fill out our survey. We're asking about how confident you feel about your job or business, how you've been impacted by the lockdown, both personally and professionally, how the industry leaders have performed, about virtual markets and events, and the return to a new normal working life and industry recovery. Just go to telecast-podcast.com/survey to complete it. It'll only take 10 minutes and you'll be helping take the temperature of the global TV industry right now. Plus, we'll send you a copy of the full results when we publish in April. Thanks a lot.
TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
The raw and revealing new film Caroline Flack, Her Life and Death, the Oscar-nominated My Octopus Teacher, Sir David Attenborough's latest hit series, and what the UKTV comedy team are looking for right now. Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to the 50th episode of TellyCast. On this week's show, my guests are Off the Fence's Bo Stehmeier, Humblebee Films' Stephen Dunleavy, and Freedman from Curious Films. Plus, UKTV's Pete Thornton is in Commissioner's Corner. It's all coming up on this week's TellyCast. My first guests on this week's show are Off the Fence's CEO Bo Stehmeier and Humblebee Films founder and managing director Stephen Dunleavy. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Hello.
Great to have you both on our 50th episode.
Woo!
Hey.
Great to have you on this special commemorative episode. Stephen, coming to you first. Humblebee Films. Tell us a little bit about Humblebee Films.
We're 10 years old, so this is your 50th edition. We're celebrating 10 years now, and we're based in Bristol, and we primarily make natural history films, like many indies in Bristol, of course. And I founded it, just myself and our head of production, Lisa Waters, on the basis of a single film 10 years ago, A Natural World, about the Komodo dragon and the discovery of venom in the Komodo dragon, which was a very exciting discovery at the time. And that dipped our toe into the indie world, and we've kind of gone from there, really. And in the last few years, have been expanding quite rapidly, which is great news for us and for the company and for all those who work for us. We pride ourselves on trying to do natural history. You know, we do blue chip natural history, but we're not the sort of company that will pitch necessarily straightforward habitat-based ideas. We try and do cross-genre. We try and look at things in a different way. So we try and introduce science or history into what we do. And we try and offer, I suppose, a slightly different perspective on the natural world in that way. But now, we're very excited that we have a new creative director, Stephen Mcquillen, who is leading us into new territories. As we hit our 10th year, we're looking at other areas of the factual world, really, and he brings with him great experience in that space. So it's a very exciting time for us.
Yeah, and you've recently had fantastic success with Attenborough's Life in Colour, of course, which recently played out on BBC One in the UK. It's currently on iPlayer and coming to Netflix around the world as well. I take it you've been working with national treasure, in fact, global treasure, Sir David Attenborough, for a few years now.
Yes. I first met David when I was at the BBC Natural History Unit, and I was there for about 15 years, and I worked on a series called Life in the Undergrowth with him. But I left soon after. I wanted to freelance initially and then set up my own indie. But we got on really well, and I've always enjoyed work with him, and I think he's always enjoyed working with me. So we've maintained a working relationship, as an independent production company. And I think it's because we offer this different avenue for him to look at the natural world slightly different to some of the mainstream broadcasters. And I think it was within our second year as an independent, we pitched an idea to him called Natural Curiosities, which actually, I know you have a guest from UKTV on later on today, but we actually wanted to pitch it towards UKTV as a series of shorts, in fact, 10-minute shorts. And we went to see UKTV with the idea, and the commissioning editor was Catherine Catton, who's now BBC Factual Commissioning, and she fell in love with the idea and thought it was fantastic because it was a look at the history of how we discovered things in natural history and looking at some of the curiosities like platypus or, and our understanding and how that's evolved and some of the most ridiculous explanations of these creatures in the past because they baffled science. And she immediately fell in love with it. So this is not 10 minutes, this is going to be half hours. So we did a 5-part series with him, and literally as we hit the edit suites with that 5 parts, they commissioned another 10 parts, and then it went on for 4 seasons. So I loved making that series, and it was the first returnable format, I suppose, that we had. And I know David really enjoyed it because it's tapped into a part of his interest in the history of discovery that he hadn't really touched on before. So it was very exciting.
So, well, let's take a short listen to a clip from Attenborough's Life in Colour.
The natural world is full of colours. Colours that attract attention, colours that blend beautifully with their background, and colours that create extraordinary displays. There are few animals more brilliantly coloured than these scarlet macaws. Animals can use colour for all kinds of different reasons, and some have colours that we ourselves can't even see. But with new cameras, some developed especially for this series, we can reveal a world that has long been hidden from our eyes.
We'll include an iPlayer link to the show in the episode description so you can all take a look at these wonderful films. And obviously, the medium of radio or podcasts doesn't show the colour and the whole concept. Tell us a little bit about the technology that you've developed, Stephen, to bring this to life.
So when we spoke about Life in Colour with David Attenborough, I knew that he tried to make a series about this in the 50s, I think, as a series producer rather than on-screen talent. And of course, in those days, they were filming in black and white. And he was very excited by the idea of, at last, and more than 60 years later, of actually tackling this subject, which is, again, taking a slightly different look at the natural world or trying to approach it from a way. We always, we see colourful animals on our screens all the time, but they don't often really go into the detail of how their colour works for them. It's often a side issue to the main stories. So he was really keen to tell this story, and part of that was using new technology to see colours or that we can't ourselves see. And we started work with a couple of scientists, one in America and one in Australia. Both of them have been working on polarization cameras, and these are cameras that can record polarized light. And it's a very complex. I still haven't quite got my head around polarized light, but it's looking at how light is refracted or reflected, and it becomes polarized as we have polarizing sunglasses. And many animals use this in their day-to-day lives. And these cameras are really in their infancy. And so we work with these scientists to really make them field-worthy, because some of them were actually being developed for medical purposes, so working in labs, and hadn't really been taken out into the field before. At the same time, one of those scientists in Australia, Professor Justin Marshall, who works on colour in animals, had been developing a UV system, which is based on it's an old traditional thing of beam splitting, but people hadn't really used it a lot in recent years, and he kind of reinvented the wheel with it, so we could do it in 4K. So he was splitting light, so you could get ultraviolet light in one camera, and what we might say is normal light, or the light that we can see in another camera. It allowed us to see both how we see the world and how other animals like insects or birds or fish see ultraviolet light in their world. So that was a big part and a real draw for David as part of the series.
And this is the first time this has been done, isn't it?
Definitely polarization. I mean, UV was touched on in Life of Birds many years ago, and that was in its infancy. But polarization cameras are very new, and I think the mantis shrimp was one of the subjects that we cover, and polarization also in fiddler crabs. But we were trying to combine the different aspects of polarized light and represent it in a way that our eyes could understand. And really, that's an aspect of software and scientists building software and interpreting the image. I mean, I liken these things to telescopes. You're not actually recording a visual image in the same way that you would with a conventional camera. You get a load of data sets which are then interpreted, and you have to then feed that in and work out what the animal is seeing. So all that is new technology in a sense, and it allows us a little window into their world.
No, fascinating stuff. Is real sort of intersection of entertainment and science. Really, really fascinating stuff. Bo, how are you doing? Welcome to TellyCast. We've been trying to get you on the show for months now. You're finally here.
Oh, playing hard to get always raises the value. So here we go.
I like that scarcity. The concept of scarcity. I like that. You're back off the fence now in Amsterdam.
I've been now away. I mean, I wasn't off the fence for about 10 years, and then I left. And on one glorious day, I got the phone call from the new mother company, the new mothership, saying, "Do you want to come back? Do you want to come back home?" And it was a beautiful phone call, and here I am.
Have you got unfinished business?
Having worked in a sort of multi-genre distribution company, and sort of the streamers rolling in, and everything was being disrupted. I had a real sense that in order to put it all back together again, you need to pick a specific genre, and doing it from a multi-genre point of view is very difficult. And sort of from a very esoteric point of view, factual or non-scripted always kept a roof over my head and food on the table. And I thought it's good to come back and to reinvest and help sort of, put back the programming and development pipeline and the production financing pipeline that have been so badly disrupted over the last, 6-7 years. And yes, and here I am, 3 months in and still excited.
Very good, very good. And congratulations. This week there's the Oscar nomination for My Octopus Teacher.
Yeah, he's totally phenomenal. I mean, it's an amazing project. Craig Foster being able to capture this, special relationship at a point in his life, which was, he was facing burnout. It was sort of really, this way or that way, and this creature came out of nowhere to help guide him, as this sort of Lao Tse saying goes, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I think not only in this film does the teacher appear as an octopus, but I think it's a perfect timely piece, because I think this little creature also appeared for us as a society. And I'm sort of very thankful that Netflix gave it such a sort of far reach globally to show this message, because it's a very, very important one. The message of we're all one, we're all connected. And for a little creature like that crawling out of the deep, dark kelp forest to possibly, fingers crossed, to win an Oscar would be phenomenal.
And hopefully it can come along and accept it as well.
Yes. Brilliant.
That would be good. It would probably need 9 different Oscars, or 8 rather, should I say that? I think there we are. 8. Octo. Thank you.
Well, let's not get greedy. One is plenty.
Yes, absolutely. So let's get a little taste for My Octopus Teacher.
A lot of people say an octopus is like an alien. But the strange thing is, as you get closer to them, you realize that we're very similar in a lot of ways. You're stepping into this completely different world. incredible feeling. And you feel you're on the brink of something extraordinary. But you realize that there's a line that can't be crossed.
So, Bo, you've also published not one, but 2 new books recently. Tell us about those.
So, between my 2 jobs, I had a bit of time, and one of my sort of secret passions, fetishes, is coaching, and I've been coaching for the last 15 years. And I've just seen more and more people around me in the corporate environment, especially, white, middle class, from a global point of view, fairly affluent, just being really miserable and unhappy. So during this time between the jobs, I decided to use it productively, and sort of did a bit of soul searching and decided to live with a Nordic shaman in Lapland for 3 weeks. And ta-da! 2 weeks later, here I am, and that's all I've got to say.
Right. Wow, I didn't know that. I knew you'd written books, but I didn't really? You went to live with a Nordic shaman?
Yes. Did a bit of soul searching. What's the meaning of life anyway? And yes, and I survived to tell the tale.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on that. We can include a link to your books, can't we, Bo, in the episode description to send people to have a look at them.
Okay. That would be great.
Great. So natural history TV production is arguably making the biggest impact on changing attitudes of populations around the world, more than governments in many cases. Perversely, it can also be one of the most expensive in terms of carbon emissions and actually creating these shows because, the huge budgets, big undertakings. Do you think there should be more responsibility? And do you think it's going to happen that more people involved in the business of making natural history shows are going to make more of an effort to reduce emissions? And in fact, after COVID, do you think that is just a logical development? Stephen?
Yes, I think even before COVID, we were already, on Life in Colour, we were already tapping into local crews where we could. We kind of decided where we really needed to send good camera operators from the UK and directors out to locations if we thought that they needed to be there. But we thought actually, particularly in India, for example, we were tapping into local crews for filming quite a lot. So we were doing an element of that. And I think COVID has obviously accelerated that, and it's become a big talking point. And I think that's going to continue, even if we get back to some kind of sense of normality. I don't know whether we really ever will 100%, but I think it's important that we all recognize that is going to be a trend. And, there are great filmmakers all around the world, aren't there? I mean, you look at the lovely film Craig has made, and Pippa and James. I mean, it's just that's a fantastic film. That's largely been filmed, it's all been filmed in South Africa and done there, and it's fantastic. So I don't think in the past, we've always had this kind of attitude of we have to send everybody everywhere. And I think we think twice about that now, which is very important.
Yeah. And Bo, as a distributor, as well as a production business, are you seeing more broadcaster and streamer demand for natural history? Things seem to have ramped up in this whole space over the last, year, 18 months. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. There's a real demand for natural history at the moment. But as with many things in life, it's like a heartbeat, right? There is a demand and it goes away. And I think COVID has definitely got something to do with the recent demands and people being stuck at home. And you don't need to sell a natural history program. The minute your screen goes onto a natural history scene, you are just immediately sort of in awe and smitten by it. And it gives people this sort of need for escapism and being outdoors. And it plays to the hands immediately. And to Stephen's point, off the fence, been working with local crews for a long, long time because, natural history is expensive, but there are many different ways of producing it. And working with local crews was always an aspect that we did, not only for cost effectiveness, but also for speed at times. And I do see similarities having come out of scripted now with natural history, because it is a very specific trade and not everybody can produce natural history. So there is a bit of a grabbing of talent, on-air talent, but also production talent. And especially around Bristol, there's a hot demand for, people who know what they're doing in sort of on ground, but also in post. And from a distribution point of view, there is a very clear divide in the TV market for the, I would say, sort of 50 plus audiences, which are very much still on linear. And we're seeing a pickup on sort of people relicensing content. The beauty about natural history has got a fairly long shelf life. So broadcasters are using their runs more than they used to, and they are getting the ratings or even higher ratings than they were expecting. But there's another side, because After Fence also partially owns the Waterbear network, which we are seeing a real spike in interest in the audience between 25 to 35, so the younger audiences. And what really excites me there is that they have an interest in the natural world, but they have very different storytelling to that world than the classic 50 plus audiences that are right now sort of leaning back into traditional genres because they just, sort of yearn for the status quo when the world was still normal. But these younger audiences are really developing new ways of telling stories. They're also moving away from the classic celebrities that are still celebrated by the 50 plus, but they're looking for new celebrities like the Greaters, and there's very interesting storytelling coming from that space, and they don't need budgets. So I'm really looking forward to the storytelling coming from that area.
Yeah, and so you're talking about short form content, are you? You're talking about literally YouTubers that are starting to build their own sort of natural history shows?
Well, I'm on a sort of secret mission to get rid of the word short form because it sort of describes what it's not. It's long form. So we like to call them atomic stories. And they are a cost-effective way, a very in-depth way of telling all sorts of different stories and sort of rewriting mainstream storytelling. It's a bit like biodiversity. We all know that biodiversity is really important, but when you're actually looking at television and the mainstream storytelling that we have, it's a bit like a mono story. There's no diversity in the way we tell stories. And these sort of atomic stories in different media that are now sort of sprinkling the media landscape have a very interesting scope of the way they tell the story, the music that they use, especially also natural history. Also the protagonists that are sort of featured in there. And I think I'm really excited by it because it's sort of this sort of narrative diversity which will keep the genre natural history going for years to come.
Stephen, you're obviously become known for being a blue chip producer of natural history, and there's streaming boom we've seen come in over the last year in particular, but over the last few years in some cases. But there's more buyers now, and a lot of these buyers are bigger businesses. They're huge, in many cases, American media corporations that are looking to invest into this kind of storytelling. Do you expect this demand to just keep on increasing and increasing over the next sort of 2-3 years?
I think it will carry on for a little longer than maybe I thought it would to begin with, because in the past we've had boom and bust with blue chip natural history making in particular, and I remember when I suppose it was just as traditional broadcasters like the BBC kind of drove that cycle. But as these streamers come online, and there are more coming, they are tending to look towards natural history, and I think we share, as Bo was saying, that it has a long shelf life. I mean, it's a little bit like drama. People, if you can put it onto one of these, and people will come to it and may watch it again because it's got great quality. So I think what is I think extending it is the fact that there are more streamers coming online and thinking, okay, why don't we try and tap into natural history? Now, whether or not 3 or 4 years down the line there'll be a shift in their way of thinking about that, or they might in some way join forces, or somebody will buy somebody else out. That may well happen. But at the moment, I think it's going to be there for a little while longer. And I think it is really the fact that people really across, Bo was talking about the different aspects of different ages, and I think that the good thing about natural history, in whatever form you look at it, is that people really, really engage with it across the whole spectrum. It's kind of we are such a polarized society these days. But natural history, everybody can have a love of natural history, and I think people of all ages. So I think there's going to be a real fascination for that. So whatever form it takes, whether Blue Chip carries on in its conventional form or whether it shifts into a different way of storytelling, I think there's always going to be a demand for natural history filmmaking.
Yeah. Is technology, obviously we're talking about the cutting edge of, like we said, science and television and the intersection of those in terms of utilizing technology to tell these new stories. Is that just going to get more and more intense? The search for new technological ways of telling stories of the natural world?
I think technology has been important for natural history, and it often pushes boundaries. But it's the storytelling that's crucial, and I think that's and having a multitude of voices is important. And I think if you can come up with, My Octopus Teacher is a great example. It's a wonderful story that combines, this kind of almost mental health of somebody and what they've been through as an individual human being with this wonderful contact with the natural world. And I think that kind of multitude of voices is more important sometimes than the technology. I think the technology often drives interest from buyers in reinventing the wheel in terms of how do you explore this aspect of natural history again. Well, we have new technology. We can go into nighttime in a different way. It does help that. But I think ultimately you have to have a really good story to tell. And I think natural history does. And I think we do. And it's really encouraging to hear with what's happening with Bo talking about Water Bear and the different voices that are coming through young people. And I think the great thing about young people is in the past, when I was making films, I had, in order to make a short film or even a small film that I could show to somebody, I had to get film. I had to get it developed. I had to get a camera, and it was very expensive. Whereas now we have cameras where you can go out and experiment, or even on phones. And even my kids, the things they create on their phones are extraordinary, and they're not afraid to experiment. And that is the great starting point, is the experimentation, because the technology today allows them to do that in a way that we couldn't years ago, because the technology for making films was owned by companies, and you had to buy very expensive stock of them or cameras. It's so much more universal now, which is great.
Technology is often also driven by tech, by the tech companies who want to sell hardware. And that's why we had sort of the 3D thing, and now we had 4K, and people are talking about 8K, and it's sort of, it's always going to be a pressure within our industry. But what I find fascinating to see is, besides technology pushing the envelope, what the hardest thing right now is to get good access, because the best stories or the most unique stories that we really want to put on screen, these people quite often don't want to have the media on site, because the distrust for the medium that we're in is so high that actually letting us into these vulnerable spaces or these secret spaces. And it's a bit like when you look at scripted and the price points for IP and book rights ballooning. I can see that sort of getting access to the best stories is getting more and more difficult. It doesn't matter how many development execs you have on your payroll. It's what your name as an organization is, and how you champion a specific subgenre, let's say within natural history, where people really trust you and let you in.
I think that's very true. And I think there was it's access to great stories and scientists or individuals who are working in the natural world. It's also access to places around the world. What we found after the initial wave of last year, and everybody was locked down, and we had a period of one of our productions was on furlough, is that we realized that as productions were slowly getting back to filming, people were trying to sort of almost buy up access to certain places around the world. And it became very competitive, because if you think, well, that's that place we can go and film, it's safe, or they want to film with us, but they're offering money. And, and I think those places, people working in those places recognize that as well. There's a real value to that. And they want to work with people they can trust. So I agree. I think that's a very important factor going forward with natural history filmmaking in particular.
And now it's time in the show where my guests get to choose their TV industry story of the week that's interested them over the past 7 days. Bo, what's your story of the week?
Well, before we go to the specific, I think that there's an overall pattern that I would like, about 18 months ago, maybe 24 months ago, when we looked at the press releases going around. I mean, they were riddled with sort of aggressive M&A, mergers and acquisition, who's going to buy who, and then, who's going to land the next talent deal with Netflix. And it was sort of like the battles of the gods, and sort of the average TV world wasn't very reflected. And, pouring through the press releases of the last week, I was really sort of, I felt excited and sort of that the old industry that we know was more present in the news feeds. There was much more talk about content and what's going where and why. There was also a lot of where I always say that a lot of people on air get celebrated, but I think the true talents can also be behind the camera, and you see a lot of key executives shuffling around, finding new homes, and where they go tells a very interesting story where the next green shoots are going to be appearing. And I think it's just a fascinating view of where it's all heading. But to my point earlier, the one story, and without constantly going back to natural history, but what I found really exciting to see is a piece on YouTube Originals, interested and willing to explore into natural history, which has always been like this draconian 50+ genre, and for these sort of new players to explore the natural world with the many different styles of storytelling that they already home now, and bringing this genre to their stables, I think will be a really exciting opportunity to freshen up natural history, and also within natural history also science, and some of these genres which are sometimes deemed to be too academic and dusty, and that just got me a bit excited.
And that's the story that YouTube's Luke Hyams is really looking for natural history projects.
Yes. And I think it's for me, that story is the tip of the iceberg. I think within that story, there's a much bigger, searching for how do we tell the stories of the world, and putting those two together is just it's a beautiful fusion.
Stephen, what's your story of the week?
Well, my story of the week goes back to the BAFTA announcement, which I think is about 5 or 6 days ago now, which had a large number of female directors in the shortlist for the first time, I think, ever, particularly after the year before where there were none. And I think the Oscar announcement too has shown an increased number of female directors and female talent represented. And I thought that was a really positive story because, particularly in the last week, it's been a very tough story, hasn't it, really, in terms of what's been happening in the UK, and how, women feel threatened, and what's going on in the general story here. I thought that was a really positive step, and in the right direction, and I hope that sort of, it's one of those stories that you see and you think can just pass by very quickly, but I hope people really pick up and run with that, because I think this idea of representation, not like diversity in its broadest form, is still a very important thing, I think, particularly in natural history filmmaking. Natural history, certainly in the UK, evolved out of a very middle-class, white, often very wealthy background, and very male usually. So it's lovely to see, if we can, there's more representation generally in terms of diversity, but also of women, actually being involved in that. But so I thought the BAFTA announcement was very encouraging.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. And we'll include a link to that story again, and Bo's link as well in the episode description. And now it's that time of the show where my guests get to nominate their hero of the week and who or what they're telling to get in the bin. Bo, who's your hero of the week?
I've got two heroes. One has a heartbeat, the other one less of a heartbeat.
All right.
I think we all should sort of talk about Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, more constantly, all the time. I think she is a blueprint of a leader that we need to have more in the world. And whenever I hear what she does and what she's doing, and also, leading a nation through emotions and vulnerability, I'm in awe every time I hear about her. That's the first one. And the second one is a bit sort of dry, but it also, I think it allows for green shoots in the future. And that is the new rules of engagement that streamers have to adhere to as part of the European Union and the European quotas. And that, a year and a half ago, those were just sort of rumbles in the jungle, and now they're really happening. And I think that will do wonders to the production and distribution community of Europe.
Absolutely. Interesting. Stephen, who's your hero of the week?
My hero of the week, because I know that you've had many people have, Piers Morgan has been
yes.
the person people have hated on your show. Well, my hero of the week is actually Alex Beresford, who actually stood up to Piers on the famous walkout scene of the last week. And Alex Beresford is actually from Bristol. Originally a weather presenter, and I thought it was quite brave of him to actually stand up in such a way and actually cause Piers Morgan to walk off set and ultimately walk away from GMB.
Yeah.
So it's a very specific thing, but I just thought, well, good on you, because you could be intimidated very much by someone like Piers Morgan, and I thought that was a really good turning point. So I admire him tremendously.
Yeah. Hopefully that will spark another side of his career. Who knows?
Well, probably, yes. But, good luck to him.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people were talking about him, obviously, last week. Stephen, who or what are you telling to get in the bin?
Well, this is I hate to say this because it's a scripted genre thing, but I really want to see fewer and fewer scripted crime dramas that have women or children being killed. And I found during lockdown that, we're always trying to find things on the streamer platforms or on the BBC, and I really struggle to watch The Serpent. The Serpent is it's been one of the big hits on the BBC, and everybody kept telling me to watch it. And I did watch it with my partner. We watched it all the way through eventually, but it took about 4 attempts because it was another example of another crime drama that involved. It wasn't just women, I must admit, in The Serpent, but it was primarily. And I just find that incredibly disturbing. And I think we have to think very carefully about the entertainment industry, about should we be commissioning these sorts of programs, really. It's not to say it was a brilliantly made series, and I watched it to the end, and the last 2 were incredibly great bit of storytelling. And but I do find that there's increasingly a lot of this kind of crime drama which taps into that kind of attacks on women or children. When you've got kids yourself, you kind of steer away from those things. And I find those a really hard watch. I know some people enjoy them, but I just would prefer to see fewer of those, really.
Yeah. You raise a really interesting point, actually, in terms of the changes that we've gone through in society, particularly over the last 12 or 18 months or so, and how they're represented when it comes to scripted storytelling. So, no, fascinating point. Bo, how about you? What's going in your bin?
I really struggled with this one. And I was sort of like combing through my day-to-day, and I wasn't quite sure what I want to throw in the bin until I kind of went a bit big picture, and then there I found it. I would like to put spelling into the bin.
Spelling?
Spelling. I am dyslexic, so I have, I don't like spelling anyway. But I think this again is a bit esoteric, but if we as a society really want to change and move away and think up of new ways, and my children are going through school and, they're dyslexic too. And I just look at the spelling rules and kind of go, if we really want to reinvent and do something, and, why don't we just throw spelling away? And let's just sort of reinvent from the micro, and how much fun we would have if we all could sort of spell our own way.
Yeah. That's completely chaotic, Bo. But I love.
I think that's a very interesting idea.
Anarchy.
Yeah, I love the idea. That's good. Well, certainly.
And punctuation is part of spelling. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, certainly spell check. Spell check will definitely go in the bin. That's for sure. The number of emails that I get sent, and I probably send as well, that have got nonsensical words in them.
But who judges that? Who judges it's nonsensical? Maybe they're beautiful in their own right.
That's right. A new art form. I like this. We could.
I agree. I think that pedants about grammar, punctuation, it sometimes stifles creativity, doesn't it? So let's just be free.
Yeah.
Be gone.
All right.
Be gone. Exactly. Be gone.
All right. Well, everybody can look at all the spelling that goes into the episode description and see how many mistakes I'm making this week. Bo, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on TellyCast on the 50th episode of TellyCast. So it's been great to have you on the show, and hopefully we'll see you in person very soon in Amsterdam or in Bristol, or maybe even in London, maybe even in Cannes, maybe somewhere else. But it's great to speak to you.
Thank you so much, Justin.
Thank you, Justin.
One of the week's most talked about TV shows was last night's, that's Wednesday, 17th of March's, broadcast of Caroline Flack, Her Life and Death on Channel 4 in the UK. Caroline Flack was one of Britain's most popular TV presenters, a host of Love Island, X Factor, and winner of Strictly Come Dancing, and it's just over a year since she tragically took her own life. Joining me is Dov Freedman, executive producer of the film, who runs Curious Films with Charlie Russell. Thanks for coming on the show, Dov.
It's a pleasure. How are you, Justin?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well. This film that you've made is an incredibly personal and intimate look at Caroline Flack's life. Tell us how you came to make it.
We actually met Caroline earlier last year, and we were talking to her about doing a film for Channel 4 that was going to be taking a look essentially about what she was going through with her court case coming up. And we met and we had a chat. She felt like making a documentary would be really helpful for her. I think she felt she wasn't being heard, her voice wasn't being heard in all the controversy surrounding her, being caught in the media spotlight. And yeah, Channel 4 were on board, we were on board, and I think everyone felt positive about making a film together. But sadly, that project never happened, and we ended up making something quite different.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the film switches between the last few days of Caroline's life and takes a look back at some of the pivotal moments of her life with really touching home videos of Caroline and her twin sister, Jodie. That must have been an incredibly sensitive process to work through with the family.
Yeah, I mean, how it essentially came about is both Charlie and I were quite struck by what happened with Caroline, and more than anything, we wanted to pay our respects to her mum Christine and her sister Jodie. Not forgetting, of course, when Caroline passed away, COVID was only a few weeks around the corner and the first lockdown. So we eventually reached out to the family, and I think we went to see them in the summer, maybe late summer last year, just to essentially pay our respects and tell them about our encounter with Carrie. Actually, what we never knew was Carrie had told her mum and sister that she was going to be making a documentary with us. So, the dots were kind of drawn together really, and quite quickly the conversation turned to what a film could look like now, and whether or not they would be interested in, going on that journey with us. I think essentially we all felt that someone was probably going to make a film about Caroline's life. As you said in your intro, she was one of Britain's kind of biggest celebrities, biggest stars. So someone was going to make a film about what happened to her. And I think the family felt that if there was one going to be made, then, it should have an essence of what Caroline wanted to do, and have their involvement with it, which is where the conversation took us.
And you mentioned Carrie early on. Can you just explain who Carrie is?
Yes, Carrie, Caroline's nickname, shortened name for what her friends and family call her. And I think she's referred to Carrie a lot in the film as well.
The film strikes me as a really sensitive study of suicide and mental health. She was obviously an incredibly talented presenter, but she wasn't equipped for everything that comes with fame today, was she?
Well, who is equipped for everything that fame throws at you today? I mean, the stories that she told us in that meeting that, we couldn't end up putting in the film, but I think some of the treatment that goes with being a celebrity today is really, really challenging. And, I think the film argues that potentially it's even harder for women. So, yeah, I know one of her friends does make that comment, but I think, Caroline's story isn't, sadly, it's not a completely original story. We've seen, women, high-profile women in the spotlight. This has happened to before, but I think what feels like heightened with Caroline's story is the role that press played, the role that social media played, and kind of mental health. We thought it was important to kind of really look back at Caroline's whole life to try and explore, why she died, what happened to her.
How do you maintain an objective view in terms of the process of making a film and creating a really great piece of work and delivering that to a broadcaster, whilst working with a family that's so clearly still shattered from this whole experience? How do you maintain that objective view?
I think we took things very slowly at the beginning with the family and kind of trying to work out what it was we wanted to make and what they wanted to make, and, having an open conversation with the channel as well. We went quite slowly with them. I think Charlie, my business partner and the director of the film, in the early stages, he just went and hung out with Christine and Jodie, just himself and the camera, just to kind of work out, first of all, get them comfortable with the process of talking about Caroline and sort of being filmed and stuff as well. So we used that as a way to work out what the story is that they wanted to tell, how honest they wanted to be. And it was a constantly evolving conversation with the channel about where we thought the film was going to be heading. I mean, I'm in awe of kind of not just Christine and Jodie, but all the contributors in the film. I think all of them are so brave and honest in what they talk about in the film. It really strikes me as kind of, one of the most powerful elements of the doc.
Well, it's incredibly moving. And you mentioned the contributors. Amongst Caroline's friends and family, there's also some of her other co-stars, Dermot O'Leary and Ollie Murs, who she's obviously both seem incredibly affected by Caroline's death. Do you think it was cathartic for them to appear in the film and talk about Caroline?
Yeah, no, absolutely, I do. I think for everyone, and I actually think even going back to Chris and Jodie, when we started filming with them, remember we were like 4 or 5 months after Caroline died. So I think that whole process, they started to understand it was going to be more cathartic for them. And then I think that flowed into our friends and family. Other friends that we see in the doc, like Dermot, Ollie, Anna Blue, in the film. But in a weird way, I think COVID has a role to play in all this as well, in that, Caroline died and then the country went into lockdown, and, I think all of us, everyone was kind of starved of kind of human interaction to some degree. But when you're throwing in grief into the mix there, I think that by the time we sat our interviewees down, we created this safe interview space that was cathartic for all of them to really open up about the loss of their friend. And I think there's a real potency again about those interviews and how honest and truthful they are. And, I do think COVID and the year that we've all lived through has had a role to play in that.
When it comes to Caroline's mum and her twin sister, Jodie, and not just her sister, a twin sister, which must make it even more difficult, were they really keen to have this film made as not only obviously something to remember Caroline by, but to touch on all those issues that you mentioned earlier on, social media intrusion, etc.? I mean, do you think that they were really keen to touch on all those elements that played a part in Caroline tragically taking her own life?
I think that's right. I don't think any of us quite understood, as I said from the outset, some of the points that the film was going to make. But I certainly think sitting down and showing them the doc about 3 or 4 weeks ago, they really felt how important this film was going to be for them, that it was going to create some sort of legacy for Caroline's death in the, you know, the areas that it touches on: mental health, suicide, duty of care in the TV industry. I think there's a lot in there, and I feel that their feeling about the film now is that hopefully it's going to start a conversation, and, you know, who knows, it might do some good.
As you say, it's incredibly timely in the context of Meghan Markle's revelations last week on her mental health issues and coping with pressure, and also the impact that abusive social media comments can have on some people. We've seen some vile abuse targeted at footballers recently. Caroline appeared to be addicted to social media as well. That's something that came through strongly in the film, and she must have been taking these really vile comments to heart, and that must have played a real role in her mental health at that point.
Social media seems to really heighten the impact it's had on her story, and you hear throughout the film a lot of those closest to her talk about how addicted to her phone and the sort of affirmation of social media she was. And yeah, I think it was something everyone was aware with her. And I think one of her agents says they tried to win her off it, but she was addicted to that kind of affirmation. And I think we all know that social media has that effect on people.
It does, and if, as we talked about earlier on, if people are less equipped mentally for that, then, you know, if they come in the firing line, it can be incredibly damaging. Is there a duty of care, do you think, from broadcasters to help their talent more? Because I think that, you know, it's easy to see people who are discovered, who are incredibly talented, whether that's on stage or as a presenter, and clearly what they want to achieve is they want to achieve fame, they want to be successful, and they want to be on the biggest shows. And that's exactly what Caroline achieved. But, you know, the impact and the pressure that brings with that, from in terms of media intrusion, in terms of her private life and everything else, do you think there's a duty of care from broadcasters to really start to help their talent a little bit more than they are doing right now? Yeah,
I think it's probably the whole industry rather than just broadcasters. But I think, you know, one of the saddest parts of the film is that Caroline felt so ashamed to share her mental health problems with those around her. And, you know, if the film does any good, then hopefully it's kind of like, let's talk about these kind of things, the problems that we have. So I think, yes, the broadcasters have a role to play, but, you know, I think that's the same for production companies. I think that's the same for, you know, production teams. You know, it's throughout the whole industry. And I think, you know, there's a lot of conversations like this around at the moment. And my hope is that if people take anything from this film, it's like, you know, if people have problems, and, you know, we shouldn't be ashamed to talk about them. It's a hard, high-pressure job in all different genres of making telly. So, yeah, I would just hope that people feel it's all right to talk about them, because that feels for me the greatest sort of tragedy that she didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I wish you all the very best of success with this film. It's a remarkably sensitive view of Caroline's life, and I really do hope it will go on to be widely recognised as something that, you know, really can play a part in making a bit of a difference to people and how they cope with mental health issues across the TV industry. In terms of other things that Curious are on with at the moment, and obviously you're actually one of the first people that's come on the show who's been nominated as a hero of the week and also come on as a guest. I think John McVeigh from PACT is the only other person to have that high accolade. That was for your previous documentary, or one of your previous documentary films, Being Frank, which was, you know, incredibly well received as well, quite rightly. What else have you been up to recently?
I'm not sure how much we can talk about, really. We've got a couple of projects in production for the BBC. We just started a new kind of true crime project for another broadcaster as well. But they're both sort of quite tightly under wraps at the moment. But we're busy. It feels like the sort of brand of the sort of films that we want to be making, kind of premium, factual stories, seems to be coming through. And yeah, we're making the kind of films that we wanted to make, and one of the reasons why we set Curious Films up in the first place. So we're busy, but looking forward to restrictions hopefully being lifted somewhat in the coming months, because I'm sure, like everyone, it's been very, very challenging to keep going through COVID and keep the teams going, and just the amount of resources and that have gone into keeping everyone safe has been considerable. But hopefully we're coming out the other end of it now.
Do you expect to see a real bounce in terms of commissions, in terms of projects that you've possibly got in at broadcasters now that might get greenlit once more and more confidence returns? Do you expect it to be a really sort of bumper second half of the year?
I'm hoping so. I think everyone, from our experience and our conversations, I think there's a lot of wait and see happening. I think particularly with projects that are involving more international travel, I feel people are maybe hoping things will ease somewhat. So projects that channels know that they want to do, they're going to sort of hit the green light on. Yeah, I think everyone's just hoping for a bit more confidence. I mean, we're hoping to be back in an office again in the next 5 or 6 weeks, probably not full time, 5 days a week, but I think, delivering films like the Caroline doc, doing it all remotely has been really, really challenging, as I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast can appreciate. So I think we're looking forward to, in the first instance, just FaceTime again with each other a couple of times a week, whether that be production meetings or development sessions. I think we're all feeling very starved of sort of personal contact.
Curious Films has been going for, 3 years now? Is that right?
A bit under, about 2.5 years.
2.5 years. Okay. So still a very young production company. You've had amazing success so far with some of your previous films, and I'm sure you will have on this one as well. Is now the time for you taking investment to grow things faster, or are you quite happy as you are growing organically?
I think we're enjoying growing organically at the moment. I think our first key priority was to sort of make sure we come through COVID and keep all our productions on track, and then throughout the year we've delivered those shows. So can we get more shows kind of commissions? Yeah, I think at the moment it's quite organic, and as I said, we're enjoying making the kind of films and projects that we want to be making. And then I think we'll sort of, maybe reassess when we're next year, when we're through this, which I hope we will be, and see what it needs. I mean, it's difficult to get a sense of where the indie community is and where the industry is, because you sort of feel you almost have tunnel vision for dealing with the challenges within your own company. So I'll be interested to see how the industry feels towards the end of the year next year, and hopefully confidence returns and we can see where we are.
Yeah, you'll get much better sense of that, I think, when everybody can get into the same room and have a chat and say, how's it gone, and what do you think, and what's this broadcaster doing, or what's this distributor planning, or whatever. But
you realise how much you miss those kind of industry get-togethers, just where you share stories or challenges or problems. I mean, that's probably been one of the hardest things we've missed kind of this year, because as I said, you're just so focused on what's kind of going on within your own company, and maybe you speak to a couple of other close friends that are doing similar things. But yeah, we feel really starved at those moments, don't we? And knowing what everyone else is going through, and how everyone's feeling and how everyone's businesses are doing. Someone equated it to me as being what everyone's boats are going to look like when the tide goes out of COVID. I think one of the things we experienced in sort of last year is we were able to speak to kind of more commissioners from like different platforms or channels than we than we had done before, because everyone's sort of sat at home essentially, right? And so we've started up new conversations with new people, and we're confident that we can, as we emerge through COVID, through the second half of the year, that hopefully they can start to become a little bit more fruitful, and we can, start working with more buyers.
Well, I'm sure you will, Dov. Thank you so much for coming on the show this week, and best of luck with Caroline Flack, Her Life and Death, which is now available on All 4 on Catch Up. Please watch the film. It's a really, really important film, I think. So thanks again for coming on the show, Dov, and we'll see you very soon in the spring sometime. Maybe some football.
My pleasure. That would be great. Thanks for having me.
And now it's time for Commissioner's Corner, our regular series of chats with commissioning executives of networks and streamers. And this week, I'm delighted to welcome Pete Thornton, Head of Scripted at UKTV. Hi, Pete. Welcome to TellyCast.
Hi, Justin. Thanks very much for having me.
Great to have you on the show. Now, we had Helen Nightingale on a few weeks ago to talk about unscripted commissioning, and I'm still looking for a female trawler crew for the idea that I pitched to Helen. You're on the scripted side. Can you tell us a bit more about your role at UKTV and your team and the drama audience and the comedy audience that you serve?
Yes, absolutely. I should, just before I start, I'm surprised you don't know the trawler show has already been commissioned. Apparently you're no longer in the loop.
Really? Is that right? Well, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I've not with Helen Nightingale, I'm afraid. That's a sad story, isn't it? No, I really enjoyed that chat, and she was very impressed. I hope I can be as informative and as useful as she was. So I look after all scripted content on UKTV. And so that is, as you say, it's drama and it's comedy, and across 3 channels, really. The comedy shows are split between Gold and Dave, and the drama shows are commissioned onto Alibi. UKTV has been going about 25 years, and we have 7 channels in the linear space, of which some are in the pay space only, and some are available on Freeview as well. So in free to air space, we have Dave, Drama, and Yesterday. And then in the pay space, we've got Gold, Alibi, W, and Eden. And then we also have our UKTV Play, AVOD catch-up service. It's quite a broad remit. I have a drama specialist, Philippa Colley-Cousins, who I hope and understand is going to be having her own session with you guys in due course. And she'll talk in much more detail, I hope, about the drama initiative, which really she's spearheading. And then I'm due to shortly arriving. We hope we have a dedicated comedy commissioner coming to join us, and that's not announced yet, but hopefully not too distant future. So at the moment, I'm still looking after the comedy team on my own. I also have a script reader, and Philip has a script reader, and there's various other people within the comedy commissioning team, within the commissioning team, who help me out in terms of just reading scripts and processing a lot of the content which we get in. There's a huge amount of scripts, as you can imagine, being submitted. So we have a submissions at UKTV website, email address rather, submissions at UKTV website, which is monitored by a colleague of mine, and so she's part of our reading team as well.
To give us an idea of the amount of original content that you commission across comedy and drama per year, can you give us an idea of what amount of content we're talking about?
It varies, and happily, from my point of view, the amount is going up, which is great. It's great to be in a growth position. On the drama side, at the moment, we have about 5 series, and we tend to do 6 times 1 hours is the shape of our drama commissions. So Philippa's looking after 5 series at the moment. 2 of those are returners, and 3 are newbies. So that's an extremely exciting, burgeoning state that she's managing over there. And then on the comedy front, we do about 3 to 4 series each a year on Dave and on Gold. And it varies in terms of total hours, because we start off in comedy, we start off by doing 3 half hours as a sort of Uber pilots. We don't make pilots in at UKTV. It just doesn't really work for us as a development strategy or route. So we do 3 half hours to start, which gives us a really good idea of the shape of any series, and it's just a better research tool than just doing 1 half hour, which is it's hard to tell what you've got from 1 half hour, particularly if you broadcast it. We don't do enough to do sort of pilot seasons. So we do these 3.5 hours mini starts, and then if we like the show and it does well for us, we bring those back as full 6-part series. So when we commission onto Dave and Gold, some of those new series will be 3-parters, some returners will be 6-parters, and we also do 90-minute one-offs, which we've had some success with on Gold and on Dave, actually. So there's 3 kind of areas, but it's broadly that's the sort of shape of things.
How about shows that are currently working particularly well on UKTV channels? Can you just highlight what sort of dramas and what sort of comedy is, really summing up where you want to be right now, and perhaps some hints to the future about the type of content that you're looking to commission in the coming months and years?
I'll let Philippa talk in detail about drama, but she's had 2 shows go out. In early 2019, we had never had our own dedicated drama commission on Alibi. So Traces was our first shot at that target, and that was in December 2019. And that broke all records on Alibi straight out of the box. And she followed that up with We Hunt Together, which was in early 2020, went out then. And both those shows were big hits for the channel, and both are coming back. So they've worked well. And they are both serialized. We have a series in production at the moment, which is more Story of the Week. So that's a new area that she's investigating. And that's starring Nicola Walker. It's called Annika. It's filming at the moment off the coast of Scotland in the North Sea, rather than me. So that's a new flavour. And we have another Story of the Week show coming down the tracks, coming from World Productions, called The Diplomat, which is set in Barcelona. So there's different flavours that she will talk about there, but she's had huge success in the drama sphere, really straight out of the box, 2 swings at the bat and 2 home runs so far. We've been commissioning for longer in comedy. We started commissioning on Gold in scripted comedy. Probably, I think about 7 years ago now was our first show on Gold, called You, Me and Them. So we've been going a little bit longer. And recently we've had a pretty good run on Gold, starting off with a series with Johnny Vegas and Sean Gibson, which started off in 2017 as a 90-minute film, a sort of Agatha Christie spoof called Murder on the Blackpool Express. That was actually commissioned by Hilary Rosen and Richard Watson before I arrived, so the kudos for that little gem really goes to them rather than me. But I've been looking after it on their behalf since then. So we've had 3 films for Gold. Murder on the Blackpool Express was followed up by Death on the Tyne, and then last year, or 2019, Dial M from Middlesbrough. And we've now evolved that show because we always like to try to keep things as fresh as we possibly can. When you get a series that's working, it's really important to us that we protect it and look after it, but also that we allow it to grow and evolve and to keep it fresh. So with the Blackpool series, with that franchise, we thought, well, we've done 3-hour-long films and as annual treats. What can we do to explore the next steps for that? And we've evolved that into 3 one-hour episodes now. So the show's slightly changed. The characters of Terry and Gemma, played by Johnny and Sean, they've now given up their coach tour business finally and become fully fledged, useless private investigators. So there's 3 hours which we made at the end of last year with Shiny Button in the teeth of COVID, and they're going to be ready to go out in the spring, late spring, early summer this year. So that's done. When that came out, the first one, Murder on the Blackpool Express, was the biggest show in Gold's entire history. So that was an incredibly interesting thing for us to discover, because we were kind of at that time, we were worried that the Gold audience weren't really that receptive to new content, because obviously if you go to Gold, you're going to watch the very, very best of scripted comedy that's out there to be bought. So the content we buy after BBC is incredibly high quality, and so when you're trying to commission your own content to compete with that, it's tough. People aren't obviously often looking for new content. So we were really delighted when Blackpool did so well for us. It showed that audience are open to new content on Gold. And we've kind of built on that success with 2 other shows, both half hours, but the Cockfields, that did very well for us. That consolidated up to over 1 million, which is a big, big audience for Gold. So that was a 3-parter. Again, we launched it with 3 parts. Tragically, Bobby Ball, who starred in that show, is no longer with us. So, we're having to look at that and how we react to that sad event. And we had Sandylands launching at a similar time. It actually went out in 2019 as well. And that was a 3x30, again, a sort of Uber pilot. And that did really well for us as well. That was actually went out in 2020, I think, Sandylands. And the episode 1 was the second highest rated show on Gold in 2020. So we've had a fairly decent run, but there's lots more we can do on Gold. That's a real area for focusing on and for not only bringing some of those shows back, hopefully, but also for new content. And then on Dave, Red Dwarf is a really interesting show for us on Dave. It's not perhaps what you would necessarily expect to see, but we've been looking after that show for a number of years now. We've made 3 series, most of those before I arrived. But we, again, thinking about keeping things fresh, we made series 11 and 12, both 6x30s of that series just before I arrived. And they did well, but we did really well. But we noticed a little bit of audience fatigue towards the end of series 12 when we sat down with Doug Naylor, who a brilliant writer and director of that series, and talked to him about, again, what do we do with Red Dwarf, a show that's been going for decades? How can we keep that show fresh? And so we suggested to him that he might like to think about writing a 90-minute made-for-TV movie of Red Dwarf. So see that show in a format that it's never been seen in before. And he reacted incredibly well to that and came up with a brilliant script. And the cast really loved the idea as well, and enabled Doug to play in a slightly different area tonally, to play with to make a show that was a little bit less about just set up gag, although it's still an audience sitcom, but be able to play a little bit more with the characterization and to write some scenes that actually delved slightly deeper into those characters that we've known and loved for so many years, to actually find out some more about their relationships. So, and that paid dividends. So Red Dwarf, the product of that was Red Dwarf: The Promised Land as a 90-minute Easter special, which went out last Easter, and again was the highest rated Red Dwarf that we've made for the last 5 years. So that did well. That rated over 2 million, which is, obviously the audiences on Dave are going to be bigger than God because Dave's in the free space. So the audience is generally going to be higher. And then the other show we make on Dave, which we love and works well, is Sliced, which again, we made a 3-parter to start, and we've made 6 parts now, and they're going to be ready to show in the near future, in the next couple of months, I hope. So again, they shot that series in the teeth of COVID in December and January. So that's come back. So it's a smaller audience than Red Dwarf, but it's a really, really valuable audience for us because the show skews young, 16 to 34, over indexes on and ABC One. So there's 2 sort of strategies for Dave, reasons why we might commission a show for Dave. Either it's going to be a reputational play that brings in what we accept to be a smaller audience, perhaps, but a very valuable audience in terms of age group, or it's going to be a big blockbuster like Red Dwarf, where you just pull in a huge audience and it doesn't really matter. It's spread across a much wider demo. The other big show that I should mention on Dave is Meet the Richardsons, which is a semi-scripted show, and that, when it launched again to over 1 million consolidated, was the biggest new show on Dave for the last 5 years. That's not, sadly, actually my show, so I'm not going to say too much about it. It belongs to Ian Coyle, my esteemed colleague who developed and brought it in, so he looks after that. But it's semi-scripted, so it's in that sort of space where I tried to take some credit for it, even though I shouldn't really.
Okay. Well, you mentioned a few productions there that you've got through despite COVID, and there's one you mentioned that there's currently going on the in the North Sea somewhere. Presumably, you've had a whole load of development backed up due to the pandemic. Presumably, there's been a lot of scripted projects that you've been sitting on, thinking, okay, we can't go into production right now. Things are so uncertain. We just can't do it safely. Are we going to see a whole load of projects that you've been developing over the last 12 months suddenly spring into production over the spring and into the summer?
Yes, I think we took a very clear policy at UKTV that we would try to stand back up all the shows that we safely could stand back up, as soon as we could. So we put, like everybody, we had to pause things around about this time last year. God, it seems like a decade ago, doesn't it? But yeah, everything was put on hold. But we made a pledge that we weren't just going to drop things, that nothing was going to get cancelled if we could possibly avoid it, and that as soon as we could, we'd get back into business. And that's gradually what we've been doing. It's harder for different genres. It's very different challenge putting on a scripted show where you've got perhaps 60 people in a crew who you've all got to keep safe and have all got to be fit and healthy. And bringing those people together at the start of every day and then letting them go back home again every evening, that's a very different challenge to perhaps a documentary or a factory entertainment show where you've got a much smaller crew and a much smaller cast. So it's been really on a bespoke one-by-one basis. And whilst it doesn't mean, unfortunately, we've now got double the slots. We've carried everything over, but we haven't suddenly got all the money we need to keep making all the shows we wanted to make last year, and then a batch of new ones this year. We just don't have the bandwidth to make that sort of level of content. But everything we've committed to is coming good. Some shows are still kind of waiting in the wings whilst COVID hopefully finally dies away. But you're going to see a big there's going to be an explosion of content making. We're already seeing it. Trying to get freelance crews now for shoots this year is increasingly difficult already because everybody is just desperate to get shows that have been simmering back on the boil. So we're already finding that finding really good people is tricky. So and that's causing some inflation. So it's been a real challenge on several fronts. Not only the extra cost of making sure that we shoot things absolutely safely, where people's health is obviously our top priority. That costs money, and that's one of those things that we've had to take on board. But also just then finding people now who are free because everyone's in demand, and that's even before you've got your SVOD giants coming on board, parking their tanks on our lawn and nicking all our crews. So yeah.
And presumably studio space as well is obviously in really high demand right now.
Absolutely. And I think that goes across, for our comedy entertainment shows, that's been very difficult. And of course, those shows are hard to make because, getting an audience in doesn't work, hasn't been possible, isn't safe. So, and a lot of those comedy entertainment shows really, they need an audience. You can shoot them without, but those performers, they kind of feed off the live buzz that you get. So I think now, again, a lot of those shows have been paused. So all those shows are coming back online. So trying to get studio space is really hard. For me, in scripted comedy, those sound stages, they're incredibly booked up. It's a tricky business. Since ITV shut their studios and obviously with Television Centre being, redeveloped, we've lost a lot of space there. And so shooting an audience show is tough now. You've got to really get in early and get your space nailed down.
Because of this backlog, does that mean there'll be less new commissioning from UKTV, particularly when it comes to comedy?
No, it's the opposite. There'll be we're ramping up all the time. So yes, some of the shows that we're making this year would have been made last year in an ideal world, but overall our spend is up. We've got about 150 projects on our slate across commissioning, so which is more than ever. And our spend in scripted is more than ever before on Dave this year, for example. Obviously, the drama projects is much newer, but that's the money being spent on drama is unprecedented on Alibi, and likewise on Gold. So we're lucky enough to be able to report growth, and that's incredibly exciting for me, as part of a team for a linear broadcaster. To be working for a relatively traditional broadcaster that's actually experiencing growth is really exciting and feels quite different, actually, I suspect, to many other linear broadcasters.
Well, maybe and hopefully we'll see even more demand coming on and money coming through the system, actually, because we had Ian Whitaker on last week, media analyst, and he was talking about this explosion in TV advertising that's about to be unleashed over the next 2-3 months. And there's some extraordinary forecasts for ITV, for example, in ad spend going up about 75% into May. So hopefully that's also going to benefit you as commercial channels, and hopefully that will lead to even more commissioning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're slightly we were semi-protected because not all of our revenue comes from advertising. Of course, we have subscription revenue as well. So last year, actually, ironically, because so many other big events such as the Olympics and the Euros got cancelled and more people were at home watching more TV, we had a really stellar year in terms of our performance. So we had a much bigger slice of the pie than we thought we would. But of course, the actual ad revenue coming in was greatly reduced. So we still didn't exactly have a fantastic time in terms of the bank balance. But it was really great to see our share going up at least. So it's fascinating. It feels to me very much like the world's like a coiled spring. It feels like everyone is kind of just waiting patiently for these last few weeks and months to pass before we can finally get back to normal. And I think the summer's going to be really fascinating, just emotionally. I think there'll be a big sort of outpouring of this kind of feeling of release. And I think hopefully that will, also show itself with people getting out and spending a bit of money and, the ad market, recovering and us all feeling a little bit more cheerful about everything.
Yeah, let's keep our fingers crossed that those pesky COVID variants are going to stay away, and we can just deal with the main one that we're trying to bat down. In terms of budgets, on the scripted side, obviously co-productions are going to be much more important. But let's just talk about from a comedy perspective. Presumably, you're commissioning. You're 100% involved in the projects. You're outright commissioning comedy shows without any other partners. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, generally, we fully fund our comedies, unlike our dramas. So we don't have a set tariff. It does vary a little bit from channel to channel, and it definitely varies from project to project. But we do have the sort of money that you need to do, very high quality work. So nobody's going to come to UKTV and find themselves suddenly having successfully received a commission, then staring down the barrel of paucity of money. That just isn't the way we work. So we're able to bat, very much alongside the bigger terrestrial broadcasters like Channel 4 and the BBC. That's not to say that we wouldn't consider co-proing. I mean, it's something that we've done in drama in the early days, really. In drama, I commissioned a show onto W, actually, called Flack, which was a co-commission with Pop, a small network in America. And that worked incredibly well for us and was very rewarding. And we're definitely interested in looking at that model for comedy on Day, for example. That's one of our longer term goals, is to see if we can get going on a sexy co-commission with an American broadcaster. It's much harder, as you'll know, with comedy because it doesn't tend to travel as well as drama does. But if we can do, it's a total win-win for us. I mean, why wouldn't we want to be in business on a show that either has double the budget we can normally be able to spend, and therefore we can afford to play with much bigger stars or much more ambitious production in general, or we can make the same show but half the money and commission double the number of shows. So it's and there shouldn't really be any cannibalization. We've proved that. We can make a show with an American co-commissioning partner that does very well for them at the same time as it does very well for us. So we know that that's not an impediment to things. So it's definitely something that I'm interested in talking to people about. It seems to me to be a win-win if we can get it right. And we have got a few bits of development, growing on our slate, which would definitely be suitable for co-proing. So it just gives us more bang for our buck. But happily for us, we can also afford to do it solo, which is handy because, the British sense of humour tends to be quite particular, shall we say.
If you can crack that Anglo-American mid-Atlantic comedy, that's fantastic, isn't it? I mean, that can be, that can turn into a real global hit if you get that right. Absolutely.
I mean, I think with Flack, that was an hour-long drama, but it was it had comedic elements. It was a little tonally, it wasn't a million miles from the sort of witty dialogue you get in a show like Killing Eve. And I think, with the recent fashion for more narrative comedies such as Fleabag or Catastrophe, to just pull a couple out of the ether, those shows have travelled well, and because they're slightly less skewed towards the pure pursuit of the joke and they're slightly more skewed towards telling a great story at the same time, obviously those stories travel. The humour is slightly compressed in the mix, and that makes it much easier to form those international alliances. So I suspect that's where we may find our joy in that ambition in the future.
So, Pete, I'm going to ask you now what you're looking for specifically in comedy, so the ears of producers will be pricking up to work out what they can pitch to you, and we'll talk about how they pitch to you in a second. But Can you be specific about what you're looking for, what slots you're looking to fill, or what sort of show you're looking to commission for which channels in the comedy space?
Absolutely. So if we start off with Gold, so we don't have specific slots. Like I'm not sitting here saying, I need a show, I need a 6-parter for, Q3 2022. We don't commission in that sense. But we always commission into the prime time slots on Gold. So they need to be able to play pre and post Watershed. So generally 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock is where we'll put our new content. But other than that, there's no hard and fast rules. And we are looking for, half-hour comedies and also for one-offs. We're looking to replicate the success we had with the Murder on the Blackpool Express movies. So, there may be an opportunity to do something else in a similar vein for Gold. So starting off with a very familiar touch points, such as a whodunit, and then putting a comedic spin on something like that. So there may be an opportunity to do something that perhaps starts off with something like a heist movie. We're in development on a couple of those sorts of projects for Gold. But I'm also looking for 3x30 half hours that can be built out to 6x30. Whatever we do, it'll always need to be returnable. So whether that's a 90-minute film, if we do that, we're never going to do a film that is just 90 minutes and then that's the end of the story. It would always need to come back every year as an annual treat, or be spin-offable in the same way as we have with Johnny and Sean's show into hour-long episodes. Gold is our sort of most mainstream channel. So back in the day when I started, Gold was probably very close to sort of ITV1, BBC One. We've evolved a little bit in recent years to make it move a little bit more towards sort of BBC Two, Channel 4 in terms of its tone, and we're trying to bring it significantly younger. So some people out there think that Gold is just a channel for people in their 60s and 70s to watch in their retirement, in their dotage, which it definitely isn't. The target audience for Gold is people in their 40s and 50s. So we're looking for shows that really over-index on that demo, and they will probably be multi-generational. So we need multiple entry points to bring in as wide an audience as possible. So if you look at a show like The Cockfields, for example, that is a family sitcom, family comedy, but seen crucially through the eyes of a couple of late 30s, early 40s central protagonists. So yes, a lot of the heavy lifting is done by the older generation in that show. But crucially, it's a family comedy that's seen from the viewpoint of the kids rather than their parents. So that's a really important shift for Gold. So producers should think about shows. Don't always think about shows about people who are in their retirement or who are dying off. We're probably not going to commission shows about that sort of end of life kind of jollity. But we are looking for shows that feel quite young for Gold. And probably language can't be too strong, but the language can be real. So, we'll definitely commission shows where people speak as they normally speak. And so we're allowed a certain amount of realistic, strong language in that, but we can't have too much effing and jeffing on Gold. And we can't have, drug abuse and hard hitting storylines, or we can't have things that are too edgy. Those sort of shows should definitely be directed more towards Dave. So I don't want Gold to feel like a sort of soft target. It's a really exciting opportunity for me because personally, my tastes lie in the sort of, Channel 4, BBC 2 frame a little bit more than BBC 1, ITV1. I love all those channels, but I find it easier to work in those slightly, when you're trying not to be too broad. And that's the direction we're moving in for Gold. The Cockfields was a huge hit for coming a bit younger. Sandylands, was again, the star of that show is 27. So, to be having a show built around a 27-year-old on Gold perhaps shines quite a strong light on where we're going with that channel. But we're looking for actually some touch points that and I don't want to be too prescriptive, but some touch points that would apply across both Dave and Gold. We look for shows that are highly relatable. We look for shows that are highly original. We look for some cultural relevance, and we look for emotional buy-in, and we look for a strong sense of authorship. So author stories, and that can mean writer-performers, doesn't have to mean writer-performers. But, those, that's probably too much of a cage to put things in, but those are the sort of areas that we look at when we examine shows that come in. So we're not really looking for high concept content or period content on Gold. It's generally going to be, as I say, multi-generational, warm and inclusive, fresh, very contemporary stories, well told, with a really interesting cast of characters. When you say you want shows that are both highly relatable and completely original, I appreciate that is a bit of a contradiction in terms, because you can't have something that feels completely fresh but is also entirely relatable to everyone. But I think what I mean when I say that is, I want relatable precincts, so settings that we all know and understand, but populated with original characters who we haven't seen before. That will give us the originality that we need, but also coupled with the familiarity that we seek. On Dave, the tone is completely different, as you might imagine. Dave is much younger. The shows that we'll commission onto Dave tend to be monogenerational, so we're really focused on 16 to 34. And really, sort of late 20s, early 30s is the sweet spot for Dave. So we're fascinated by stories told by people and for people who are in their late 20s, who are just, starting out on life's journey and finding their own feet. Perhaps they're just, moving out of their parents' house. Perhaps they're just starting on their career, or they're starting on their first serious relationship, or whatever it might be. But the 20s is an incredibly interesting and funny decade, I think. It's the time where you can make as many mistakes as you like. And it doesn't really matter if you come out at the end of your 20s and you haven't really got anything achieved yet, because that's the decade that you're supposed to be just experimenting, exploring, making lots of mistakes, trying lots of new things, and that inherently is a rich ground for comedy. So, and we can be quite risky, and we can be quite edgy on Dave, and we need to be quite noisy, I think, in that space. If you look at a show like Sliced, that's a very simple, again, a highly relatable world. It's just two guys who have got crappy jobs delivering pizzas, who are just trying to get by and make a bit of money and not be persecuted by too many people. And maybe if they get lucky, find a girlfriend. Those ambitions that everyone has in their 20s, they're central to that story, and we enjoy then throwing rocks in the path of those relatively modest ambitions. And when we upset those guys, that hopefully that lovable duo at the heart of that show, and Samson Kayo and Theo Bocklin Biggs' characters, we do that through authority figures. So we'll do that through either it's their boss, or it's the police, or it's their parents, or whatever. So we feel united, hopefully, in our guys, and them having their lives ruined every week by these slightly older characters. So that's how we tend to do that for Dave. But those same sort of watchwords of relatability, originality, cultural relevance, we won't commission anything that doesn't feel as if it has something to say about modern life. We're really interested in stories that shine a light on what it's like to be growing up in Britain right now. So another reason why we tend to shy away from doing period content on Dave. It's quite a difficult thing for us to do. And again, we've come on quite a strong journey from very high concept content. I mean, Red Dwarf is about as high concept as you get, although it is also obviously a domestic comedy about a group of characters living in a confined space you don't get on. That's inherently very funny and has done us very well for 30 odd years with that show. But it's sci-fi. We've come from that through Zapped, which was a show I was looking at for a while, which I loved, but again was quite high concept. About a guy falling through a tear in the fabric of time, through to Porters, which was much more grounded, but a workplace comedy set in hospital, against, but slightly heightened, still heightened characters and still heightened, action, through to Sliced. And Sliced is really the sweet spot, I think, which is very low concept. So, that's the sort of journey. It doesn't mean to say we wouldn't, go back the other way, but at the moment, we are looking to really hit that relatability target. And I think, we're trying to keep nimble. We're trying to react to the times. I think, with what we've all been through over the last year, that's changed people's thinking a little bit. I think everyone needs a bit of a cheer up. So we're probably much more open to shows that major on gags than we were when we were looking at more narrative comedy. Again, we're looking at both, but I'm very aware of, the need for people to escape a little bit.
Well, funnily enough, I've got an idea for a female trawler crew comedy.
Is it funny? Is it funny, though?
It's very funny. Post-Brexit, out on the high seas fighting the French fishing boats. Yeah, there you go. What are you definitely not looking for?
Yeah, I've touched a little bit on what we're definitely looking for. I think for Dave, shows that have a very broad age range or have major roles for older characters probably wouldn't play on Dave. So keep focused on that exciting 16 to 34 age group. Other than that, there's nothing really that is off limits. There's a really broad ambition in terms of tone. So, we're looking at more, could we launch a half-hour drama on Today, for example, at some point in the near future? That's a discussion that is ongoing. We keep looking at that and mulling that. I'm really interested in those modern dramas that skew young, like Normal People and I May Destroy You, that are in that half-hour format. So fascinating that when they came to make I May Destroy You, they decided on 12 half hours rather than more traditional 6 hours. So, is there a half-hour drama opportunity on Dave? Something that we might look at. But, so tonally from there through. So there's no real limits there. But I think, what we probably wouldn't do is something that we've got that feels similar to what we had before. Okay, so we wouldn't do something that was set in South London about, a couple of guys in the food delivery business, for example. That's no surprise to anyone. On Gold, period comedy is difficult, although I love the ambition of shows like that. I think that's tricky. Shows that feel too tonally harsh are very tricky for Gold. We probably wouldn't do a comedy drama on Gold. People of that audience coming in to watch content on that channel are used to a high gag rate. They are used to warm, inclusive, broad, appealing. The gold standard of British comedy for years and years and years is the bedrock of that channel. So, we're not trying to compete with that. And in fact, when we have made shows that we thought, well, let's make something that feels a little bit like that content, it's really not worked out for us, because people go, well, why would I watch Only Fools and Horses? Why would I watch something that's a bit like Only Fools and Horses when I can watch Only Fools and Horses? Which is understandable. So where we've had success on Gold, we've moved away from there. We're still keeping some classic ingredients, but we try to make shows that feel much more contemporary. So I wouldn't do anything that feels traditional in any way. It needs to be, again, something that shines a light on what it's like to be alive right now, and comments on the world today is really important for us on both of those channels. So, so avoiding shows that feel traditional is a big one for Gold. And I probably won't on an awful lot of cancer comedies. I don't know why for Gold. People think that's what that audience wants. They don't want that. I can tell you that. So we won't do it. We won't be doing a comedy about end of life anytime soon, I don't think.
Right. Okay. And I believe you currently have 2 writers' initiatives underway at UKTV.
We do. And that's really important for us to do our bit, and more than our bit, in fact, to support diverse voices and to be more inclusive generally in all that we do. The first initiative is our Diverse Writers Initiative, which is a project orientated towards Dave. That's running at the moment, and submissions are still open. You can submit work to that initiative up until the 25th of this month. So that's really for any writers who feel that their voices aren't currently being heard or seen on British TV. And the commitment there is that we will filter down all these submissions, working with 2 organisations that I respect and admire a lot, Dandy and Triforce. They're going to work with us to get those submissions down to a manageable shortlist, and we will work with them to find 6 finalists. So we'll commission 6 full half-hour scripts from that batch. And the stories can be just whatever the story is that you want to tell. It doesn't have to be funny, doesn't have to be dramatic, can be anywhere in between those 2 things, but just stories that are personal to you, that you would like to get out there. We will commission 6 half-hour scripts, and those writers will be mentored and supported and helped through that process over a 3-month period. And from those 6 half-hour scripts, we will commission 4 individual episodes. So we're going to make a little anthology series to be broadcast on Dave. So that's a commitment from us to make at least 4 of those stories. And obviously we hope that each of those 4 stories could spin off into their own full series. But that's our starting point for that, a diverse anthology series that we're committed to making and broadcasting either late this year or early next year. And the second initiative is our Female Writers Initiative. And this is really a reaction to an audit we did on our slate at the very start of this year, where we realized that, as with many other broadcasters, I think we were underperforming in terms of female voices and female writers on our development slate. Is something that I've been puzzled over. I don't know why that's the case, but it definitely is the case. We've been developing and commissioning more male writers in the comedy space for a while. So I want to change that. I want to get us much more back to the correct 50-50 split that we all must aspire to. So we're working with Saskia and Emma at Comedy 50/50 on that initiative. The submissions have closed for that, unfortunately. We ran it fairly quickly. I hope it'll be the start of something much, much bigger and much better. But to give you an idea of how much demand there is, if people say, well, there just aren't the female writers out there, we threw the gauntlet down and said, send us, just a paragraph idea of a story you'd like to write and a 5-page writing sample. And we only opened the submission window for a relatively short period of time. It was open for, I think, just less than 10 days, and they received over 900 applicants. So if you think there aren't female writers out there who are hungry for work and hungry to be able to practice their craft, then they're completely mistaken. So that process, again, we're committed to making, in this case, we're going to commission 10 full treatments from the ideas that we receive. And from those treatments, we're going to commission at least 3 full half-hour paid scripts. So, and obviously from those scripts, we hope to make some shows and we hope to make some series. So, again, I'd like to return to that. We've got to go through this process once and see, what each of them return. But it's really exciting for us to be working on these initiatives and to be hopefully working with some new people. And if they go well and if they bear fruit, then I'd love to think that we could do them every year and do them bigger and better each time.
Very good. Fantastic. Well, we'll put links in the episode description to the initiative that is still open, so people can go to that and check that out. And then finally, how do producers contact you? You mentioned earlier on there's a portal, there's somewhere that producers can go to and submit their ideas. Can you just tell us about that?
Yes, absolutely. So there's several ways. There's an email address dedicated to this, which is submissions@uktv.co.uk. And that is a monitored email. If you send work in there, it will get read. It doesn't go to a junk bin. It does take a bit of time sometimes because we get a lot of submissions, but we take those, I think it's incredibly hard to be a writer, and if you're trying to be a writer, then respect to you, and we want to do the right thing by those people that do send ideas into us. So we do try to read everything as quickly as we possibly can. So that's one avenue that's open. We quite often receive work via an indie or via an agent, and that does help, just to have that backing. So that's a route that I would definitely suggest to writers who are thinking about submitting work to us. If you can get representation, or if you can come to us via an indie, then it really does increase your chances of getting a quick read, significantly. So those 3, an indie, an agent, and just through the submissions email are the 3 main ways to reach us.
Okay, fantastic. Pete, thank you so much for coming on the show and giving us a really comprehensive look at the comedy that you're looking to commission. And we'll have Philippa on the show in a few weeks' time to talk much more about drama commissioning on UKTV. And I'll be in touch after this about the female trawler crew comedy. That's
Absolutely. As I say, sorry that that Helen's version of that show has sailed, but obviously the comedy version is still very much up for grabs. So I'll look forward to picking up with you later on. I promise not to stitch you up like Helen did.
Very good. And obviously, I'm going to be developing a costume drama as well. If that doesn't work, so you can tell Philippa to watch out for that one. Pete, thanks so much for coming on the show. Great to speak to you, and all the best for this year.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks very much for having me.
Well, that's about it for our 50th episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to TellyCast and share it with friends and colleagues on social media. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter called TellyCast Plus. It's packed with interesting TV industry stories you may have missed, exclusive insight and opinion, including the secret producer, our intrepid, anonymous exec, reporting from the front line of TV production. It's all completely free. Just visit our website to sign up at telecast-podcast.com. And you can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in Lockdown 3 in London. We're still in lockdown. So until next Thursday, as always, stay safe. To celebrate a year of TellyCast, we've teamed up with Workshare Consulting to launch the TellyCast Workshare Content Industry Monitor. Taking the pulse of the global business of TV, this exclusive regular survey will analyse your views to find out how the TV business feels about the key issues it faces today. So, we're asking all of our listeners, from producers to financiers, from distributors to networks, and everyone in between, to please take a few minutes to fill out our survey. We're asking about how confident you feel about your job or business, how you've been impacted by the lockdown, both personally and professionally, how the industry leaders have performed, about virtual markets and events, and the return to a new normal working life and industry recovery. Just go to telecast-podcast.com/survey to complete it. It'll only take 10 minutes and you'll be helping take the temperature of the global TV industry right now. Plus, we'll send you a copy of the full results when we publish in April. Thanks a lot.